pastoral counselor at the Valley Pastoral Counseling Center here in Waynesboro, and also director of education for our center. And it's been my privilege to serve as the chairperson of the steering committee that planned this event tonight and this focus on fathering. And if I might, I'd like to briefly introduce those persons to you and let them stand and let you thank them for this whole day's event that some of you have been at, this being your third meeting. Some are new tonight. So if the committee members would please stand as I call your name, we will thank you. Dr. Steve Hallett, representing the First Baptist Church of Waynesboro. Bob Uhas, representing Social Services of Waynesboro. Carol Blair, the Office on Youth in Waynesboro. Ms. Deborah Watson, Director of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of the Blue Ridge. Ms. Mary Lou Leake, Board Member of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Reverend Doug Desper, Board Member of Valley Pastoral Counseling Center and representing Waynesboro Ministerial Association. The Reverend Wayne Parsley, President of the Stanton West Augusta Ministerial Association. Ms. Jane Jordan Bauer, the Executive Director of the Mental Health Association of Augusta. Mr. Robin Crowder, Assistant Superintendent of Waynesboro Schools and with the Valley Alliance for Education. And the Reverend Steve Scoggin, who served as ex officio member of our committee, and along with Pastor Bill Wilson of this church and the Family Ministry Committee of this church, birthed the idea and got this vision started back in March of this year to have David Blankenhorn come and join us. So would you join me in thanking all of these tonight for their work? I would like at this time to call on the pastor of this church, Reverend Bill Wilson, and ask him to come and bring greetings to us from the First Baptist Church.
You made a good choice with how to spend your Friday evening. I can tell you that based on both the addresses today and the fact that 2 years ago I heard David Blankenhorn address a group of ethicists, interesting word, ethicists, and he captured our imagination and stole the show from some other folks who were there, and since that time has been, in my mind, speaking a word of truth that needs to be heard in a wide and wider audience. And so I appreciate your taking the time to be here tonight. We're glad that you're in this church and are part of this conference. We'll be moving downstairs later, and restroom facilities are there, as well as in the hall to my left and your right. And if we can be of any help to you tonight, please let us know. We're glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Now, before I introduce Mr. Blankenhorn to us tonight, please note your schedule for the evening, if you would with me for a moment. Mr. Blankenhorn is going to speak to us here in this gathering in just a few moments. And then, right around 7:45, we will take a break and enjoy refreshments downstairs below us directly and enjoy a community resource fair. There are 16 or 17 community organizations downstairs who are interested in solving this problem of fatherlessness, and they would like to share with you what's going on in their organization and also to get your ideas. So take that 30 minutes to enjoy yourself, take a break, have some food, see the resource fair, and before you go or during that time, if you would take the little 3x5 card that you were also given tonight. After you hear Mr. Blankenhorn this evening, please write down the question that you would like to ask him. And during the break, he will look over those questions, and then we will return at 8:15 for an additional 45 minutes where he will respond to your written questions. And then depending on how late we stay tonight, he might just get into a free discussion even after that. So that's what the little note card is about. You may give that to one of our committee members who will be standing at the doors as we go to the break time.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. We had a really great breakfast meeting this morning with a number of pastors from the community and a nice lunch with a number of community and business leaders, and I'm well fed, and some of you have were at a couple of those meetings, and it's just been a delight for me to be here with you today. You've got a good community here, and I'm really grateful to get to meet some of you during the course of this day. Let me put my thesis to you as simply as possible, discuss it with you a moment, and then we'll all discuss it together. And here it is. It's really pretty simple, and it's also pretty disturbing. We are living in an increasingly fatherless society. I'm not going to give you a lot of statistics tonight, but here's one I do want you to think about. Tonight, 40% of the children in our country are going to go to sleep in a home where their father does not live. And before they reach age 18, more than half of all American children are going to spend at least a big part of their childhood living apart from their father. You know, if you divided the country into two parts, and on one side you said, let's put all the children who are going to grow up with their fathers. And on the other side of the Mississippi River, you said, let's put all the children who won't. The way it is now, you would put about the same number of children on each side of the river. So that tonight, as the children of the country go to sleep, fatherlessness has reached a rough parity with fatherhood as a defining experience of American childhood. Now, my friends, you know, we are in uncharted waters here, because never before in our nation's history, never before in the history of any nation have this many children been separated from their fathers. So we have an historically unprecedented separation of males in our society from their offspring and from the mothers of their offspring. And I want to suggest to you tonight that this trend of fatherlessness is the most dangerous social trend of our generation. You know, the Blue Ribbon Commissions have looked into this question of what's happening to children in America. What are the conditions facing children today? And you know, they have determined that childhood is becoming a harder and harsher experience for our children. There was a commission several years ago that looked at the well-being of adolescents and children in the United States, and here was their conclusion. This generation of children is the first generation in American history to be worse off than their parents were at the same age. Worse off. So it's an interruption of the American dream that has always said, things will be better for my kids. I've faced some problems, but it'll be better for our children. For this generation of children, it's the first time that they are worse off economically, educationally, socially, psychologically, morally, worse off than their parents were. Why would that be the case? And again, the scholars and the Blue Ribbon bipartisan commissions have looked at this issue, and yes, there are many reasons that are driving down the well-being of our children, from violence on television to you name the problem, the availability of drugs and guns and so on. but the single most important reason for the decline of child well-being in our country today is the breakup of the mother-father child-raising unit, the fracturing of the nucleus of the nuclear family for millions of our children, such that we now have 40% of the children without their father in the home, and it's getting larger every year. And this is the principal reason why the experts are telling us that the well-being of our children is deteriorating. And I want to suggest further to you that this issue of fatherlessness is the engine driving our big social problems that we're most concerned about. And whether you're looking at the issue of crime, or teen pregnancy, or children living in poverty, or domestic violence against women, or the rising incidence of abuse and neglect of children, including sexual abuse. You know, I bet that even in a good, solid community like this one, if those of you who work in the human services, you see this. These are growing problems in all of our communities. You know, and in many of our communities, there's a sense that these problems, especially afflicting our young people, there's a sense that they're just spinning out of control. They're getting larger every year, and they're becoming quite frightening. Well, where are they coming from? What's the common denominator? What's going on here so that even though with each year we organize new efforts and have new social workers and police officers and community programs, and we try as we might, that the problem seems to be getting larger, not smaller. And it's been getting larger, not smaller, for 3 decades now. Why would this be the case? And the answer is that the growth of all of these critical social problems has a common basis. And the basis of it, the underlying engine that's driving the increase of them, is this unprecedented separation of fathers from their children. And let me just give you a quick example or two. Let's look at the issue of crime. And you know about the explosion of violent crime in every community in our country. And indeed, you probably know that the number one spending program that we have today for young men is prison construction. Prison construction. We are building new prisons just as fast as we can because we find it necessary with each passing year to incarcerate an ever larger number of our young men. And nevertheless, despite this, we are generating violent young men faster than we can lock them up. Which young men? Which ones are they? And you may have heard some people say that, well, this is a racial issue, that it's the black kids that we're locking up and it's a racial problem. And other people have said, no, it's a poverty problem. It's poverty that is the predictor here. That it's the poor kids that end up going to jail, and the less poor kids or the not poor kids are inoculated. And other people have said, no, it's education. That's the key. The young males who can graduate from high school are going to be much less likely to end up in a prison cell than the kids who were dropping out of school. And other scholars have investigated the hypothesis that perhaps it's the quality of the neighborhood. Maybe if the neighborhood is a rough neighborhood with guns and drugs and gangs, that's what's going to send these young guys tend to be down the wrong direction. And if not, then they're less likely to get in trouble with the police. And the scholars have looked at this issue and studied it every way it can be studied, and here is what they tell us. The presence or absence of a father in the home of the young boy is the single most important predictor of whether or not he's going to get in trouble with the police and go to jail. It's more important than race or income or educational attainment or what kind of neighborhood you live in. And so 70% of the juveniles in our long-term correctional facilities are young boys that grew up without their father in the home. And why would that be? Why would that be? It's because the young boy, at a certain stage in his development, he needs to separate a bit from his mother psychologically and figure out what it means to be a man. He needs to find the meaning of his masculinity. And the fathered boy, the boy with a strong, nurturing father in the home, can find a good answer to this question. He can say, I want to be a man. I want to prove that I'm a man. And his father, through his love and through his words and through his deeds, can say, good. I want you to be a man too. You're my son. And I want you to be a strong man. And I can kind of knight you man. You can pass my test of being a real man. And a real man is a guy who takes the needs of other people into account, and he treats other people right. He treats women right. And that's the basis of being a strong man. Being strong for others and treating other people right. What happens to the unfathered boy, the boy without a father in the home? He needs to know this. And I hope I won't offend you when I report to you that the best mother in the world can't teach her son this. And so he needs to figure this out. And so where's he going to look? He's going to look at his friends on the street, the gang, the peer group, the popular culture, the Rambo movies, to figure out what it means to be a man. And you talk to the guys that get into trouble with the police, and yet you talk to them about what it all means. Listen to their words. Treat me like a man. I'm a man. I want to be a man. It's like they're screaming this out. And their view is they are engaging in what the scholars call protest masculinity. It's a hyper-exaggerated form of masculinity. It says, I'm a strong man because I can hurt you if you look at me the wrong way. Or I'm a strong man because I sleep with my girlfriends and some of them will have my babies, and that proves that I'm a strong man. And so, if we are a society that is going to say that larger and larger numbers of our young sons are going to grow up without their father, we had better get used to building more and more prisons. Because a society with fewer and fewer fathers will need more and more jail cells to do what the fathers are not doing. And if we look on the other side of this equation, on the daughter's side, because a society that has more and more boys with guns is going to be a society with more and more girls with babies. And so the explosion of teen pregnancy and out-of-wedlock childbearing in this generation, where is it coming from? What's causing it here? And again, the scholars who have looked at this issue will tell us that the presence of a father in the home with a young girl is the single most important predictor of early sexual activity, the likelihood of having a child outside of marriage, an unsatisfactory sexual relationship, and if she does get married, the likelihood of divorce. The presence of the father is a more important determinant of outcomes in these areas than her skin color, than her income, than whether she graduated from high school or what kind of neighborhood she lives in. You know, and why would that be? And it's because the first man in every girl's life is her father. He's the first man who she wants to love and be loved by. And so the fathered girl, the girl who has a strong and nurturant father, she is much more able to develop a sense of confidence in her femininity, develop a sense, really, I think at bottom, a sense of her love-worthiness. I am worthy of love by this other creature called a man, and I am capable of being loved by a man. The unfathered girl, the poorly fathered girl, is at much greater risk for engaging in a kind of anxious quest for male approval, because she does not have the sense of esteem in her own femininity. She does not have the love from that first man in her life. So what happens later? She says, I'll sleep with my boyfriend and I'll have his baby because I am looking for that male comfort and approval that I did not get from the first man who I needed it from. In the evidence that we have regarding teen pregnancy, the tragic conclusions of the recent research tells us that for many of the teenage girls in our communities who are getting pregnant and having babies, the fathers of these children are not teenage boys, they're grown men. They're grown men. And so it's in the younger the girl, the more likely it is to be a grown man, not a teenage boy who's the father. In this, we know from Judith Wallerstein and other scholars have told us, the involvement with older men, it's looking for the affection, the approval that she didn't get from her father. So if a society that has fewer and fewer fathers is going to be a society that has more and more prison cells, it will also be a society that will have more and more welfare offices and more girls who are, beyond the issue of welfare dependency, not able to have the sense of confidence in their love-worthiness that allows them to form a satisfying and strong and healthy relationship with a partner in life, in marriage. And it's a terrible price that we are paying in this area. I'm not going to go down the list of other problems, but I think I could give you the evidence that if you want to look at the explosion of child poverty in our generation, you know, for a number of years, child poverty was going down in the United States. And over the last 20 years, it's began to go up again. 25% of all children in the country live in poverty. They don't have the basics of life in terms of nutrition and clothes and health care. And why would we see an explosion of child poverty? And again, the scholars are showing us that the increasing absence of the father is the main reason why we're seeing the spread of child poverty. You know, a couple of generations ago, whether a child was poor or not primarily depended upon what her father did for a living, whether her father was employed and what kind of wages her father earned. Today, it increasingly depends on whether or not she has a father at all. Because a majority of children living in poverty today are children of never married mothers who do not have a father in their lives. So right on down the list, we see this connection between the big social problems that you were concerned about, and if you turn on the television or look at the newspapers or walk down the street, the problems that are paining us and concerning us most are inextricably linked to this underlying common denominator of father absence. You know, and I think that is about half of the problem. And I'm not going to spend as long telling you about the second half, but let me just briefly tell you that it's not just that we're losing the fathers. And it's not just that that loss is causing a spread of social problems. We are losing our idea of fatherhood. We are becoming a culture of fatherlessness. We as a society are changing our minds about this question of, do children need fathers? We are losing our belief that fathers are important. And I think that cultural loss, that philosophical loss, that sense of uncertainty and skepticism and ambivalence about this basic question as a society, do children need fathers? And today, if you look in the newspapers and watch have the discussions, you know the main answer to that question is, do children need fathers? And we now say, you know, not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's all too complicated. Things have changed too much. Maybe there's really nothing we can do about this. And so we have come to accept, with a remarkable passivity, I believe, we have come to accept in our generation fatherlessness as normal. As normal. Regrettable, perhaps. Sometimes we wish it could be otherwise. But with calmness and equanimity and with a sense that there's not much we can do, we in this generation have come to accept it as normal, and we no longer even expect fatherhood for all or even most of our children. This is an attitudinal change of a dramatic dimension. You know, the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead once said that the supreme test of any society is whether it can teach its men to be good fathers. It was a remarkable statement, and why would she say that? It's the supreme test. And we know that as an esteemed anthropologist and as a woman anthropologist at that, Margaret Mead was certainly not ignoring or dismissing the central importance of the mother. Because indeed we know that in human societies, the mother-child relationship is the strongest bond. It's the strongest. And you don't find human societies where mothers leave their children. Children stay with their mothers. It's a universal. In our society, the men are leaving. And so Margaret Mead knew that the father-child relationship is weaker than the mother-child relationship. And we men like to think of ourselves as the strong ones, but in this area, the father-child bond is more fragile. It's weaker. It's more easily broken. And so Margaret Mead and the other anthropologists have taught us that that's why we men need society. That's why we need culture to link us to the mother-child unit, to harness maleness and masculinity to the future generation, to link it to what the famous analyst Erik Erikson called generativity, to take the male and connect him to the next generation. And the institution that we have improvised in human societies to do this is called marriage, and the social role that we encourage men to play is the role of father. Because across human societies, Fatherhood is the way that we socialize men to be good men by harnessing maleness to a pro-social purpose, to investing in their children, providing and raising and nurturing their children, and being a partner to the mother of their children. This is how we get men to be good men. This is the trick in human societies. And therefore, Margaret Mead could say that the supreme test of any society is whether it can teach its men to be good fathers. Because you see, it's not just a question of being concerned for the children. We're concerned for the men, and we're concerned whenever millions of men in our society, growing numbers of them, are biological fathers. We men have little need for practice or encouragement in that direction. As procreator, as the spreader of seed, we remain steady on the job. So biological fatherhood, but we are not matching it with social fatherhood. We are not matching it with being there for our kids and for the mothers of our kids. And so when a society no longer expects and requires and teaches biological fathers to be social fathers and partners to the mothers of their offspring, then we have a lot of guys who are isolated and lonely and unhappy and separated from the most important aspects of what the founders of our country called the pursuit of happiness. Now, I've told you a sad story tonight, and I want to conclude on a more optimistic note, because I think, if I just came here to you and told you the sky was falling and that was that, why, we would just kind of sigh and go home, and that would be that. Because if they can't do anything about a problem, why, then it might as well not be a problem, because there's nothing that can be done. But I think there are things that can be done. And I think that it is wrong that we have so far accepted with passivity this trend of fatherlessness in our society. And I think the challenge that we have now is to stand up and take action and reverse this trend. And I'll tell you that I believe that we have a window of opportunity now, more so than at any time in a generation, to do something about this problem. I've had a chance, to travel around the country and talk to people about this issue for the last few months, and some interesting things are happening. I'll bet you can tell through watching TV and reading the newspapers and magazines and listening to the talking people heads talk that there's more of a recognition now of this problem. There's more of a discussion of it. It's less of a politicized issue. There's more of a general recognition now. That there's been an elephant in the room for some time now. And for all this time, we've just ignored him. And we've just said, have a nice day, and pass the salt, and good to see you. And no one has said, there's an elephant in the room. He's breaking the furniture, and he's a scary creature, and he's not just going to go away. And it's not a cuddly little mouse, it's an elephant. There's a sense in our public conversation now, I believe, that we are increasingly, as a society, saying, there's an elephant in the room. There is something big happening in our society. Whenever you have millions of children over here and their fathers over there, and that there's something big going on, and there's a recognition that we must do something about it. And furthermore, even more important from my point of view, there is movement on this issue in communities. There are new leaders emerging. There's new activity. There's something happening in a number of communities around the country. And, it's been the most inspiring thing for me as I have visited a number of places, and I have seen leadership across lines of race, across the denominational lines, within the churches, outside the churches, across economic lines, across lines of region, people who weren't doing this a couple of years ago. I went back to the hotel to rest for a moment before this evening, and I got a call, and it's just an example, but it just struck me. There's a huge foundation, the Hewlett-Packard Foundation out in California, and they have decided to start a program of their foundation on fatherhood. And they're going to give away millions of dollars to community organizations around the country. They're working on fatherhood issues. And that may not be such a big deal, but you know, in the last 6 months, 4 major foundations, Ford, Rockefeller, Annie E. Casey, and Danforth foundations, these are huge foundations, have created fatherhood programs. So it's a topic that's on our lips. It's an activity that people are beginning to take action on. And I just want to conclude by urging you, to consider in your own lives and in this community, if you think this is a problem, if you think that it explains some things that are going wrong, I urge you to consider being a part of the solution, beginning in your own lives. That's where it all has to begin. And as neighbors and citizens and as church members, to try to do something about this. And in a little town in California called Merced, it has the second highest rate of father absence of any county in California. The community leaders are actually formulating a resolution, and actually a written resolution, to be finally passed by the city council after it's been discussed in community meetings and discussion groups and within the business community and within the church leadership and so on, to make a formal commitment as a community to take action to reverse this trend of father absence. And then they are hoping to work through the church community on issues of marital preparation and marital enrichment, to the hospitals, the schools, the community associations, anywhere where the community is in touch with the young people of the community, to do a much better job of reaching out to young people about this issue. So the specific strategies are ones that I think that we could get into a pretty lively discussion about. And perhaps you have some ideas of some things that could be done in this community. If it's not a problem here, well, I'm out of here tomorrow, and so you got to decide. But I would just urge you to think about this, and if there's some action you can take, to take it. Perhaps beginning with the leadership and the citizens of the community making a kind of a commitment, discussing it and setting a goal of reversing this trend of fatherlessness, because I don't think there's anything we could do as a society to improve the conditions of our children's lives and to improve the well-being of our communities. I don't think there's anything more important than this one. Ultimately, I believe what is at stake is the success of our American experiment. I don't mean to sound grandiose when I say that, but let me just say that this experiment that we have been involved in these last several hundred years in this country is an experiment in freedom. It's an experiment. We're a sweet land of liberty. We're a land that lets freedom ring. That's the American proposition. That's the American idea. It's the idea of freedom of self-government, of the freedom to worship as we please. It's the notion of what we call ordered liberty. This is the American experiment. And I'll tell you that the success of the American experiment depends decisively upon these basic cultural institutions, the most important of which is the family, that can produce citizens of competence and character, and that can turn children into good citizens. And so what happens is, if we as a society allow the collapse of male responsibility in our society, if we allow the destruction of the mother-father-child raising unit, what we are really doing is destroying those institutions that make freedom possible. And what will happen as we destroy the institutions that make freedom possible, the two major trends will be a continuing decline in the well-being of our children and a continuing rise in the incidence of violence in our society. And those two trends of male violence on the one hand and the decline of child well-being on the other hand are inextricably connected together and are rooted in this collapse of responsible male behavior for our children. And I know that this is not the only thing that's going on out there. And I know that if we get a grip on this problem, it won't solve everything we're concerned about. But I am suggesting to you that it would be the single most important thing we could do to reverse the social recession that we are now in and to prove wrong the analysts who say that we will be a society in decline in the next century. So with that note of both the seriousness of the issue and I believe the unprecedented opportunity that we have now to do something about it, perhaps not everywhere in the country all at once, because if we get a grip on this problem, it won't be because of some clever people on TV or some people in Washington had some good ideas. Forget about it. It's not going to happen that way. It will be because there are some people in communities who say they are tired of this trend and are going to turn it around here. And so I would leave you with the challenge as you think about the future of this community to see if there aren't some things that you might do here to bring the fathers back. Thank you very much. Barrier, you know. What's the breakdown between, within the 40% figure of fatherlessness, what's the breakdown between illegitimacy and divorce? It's about half and half. About half of the children living apart from their fathers today are that way because of divorce, and the other half because of non-marriage. But the divorce rate has stabilized somewhat over the past few years. We still have the highest divorce rate in the world, but the divorce rate has stabilized a bit, and the out-of-wedlock childbearing rate continues to go up. So it's the fastest growing family trend in the country right now, non-marital childbearing. But right now it's about half and half. If current trends continue, soon out-of-wedlock childbearing will surpass divorce as the primary generator of homes without a father in them. Why do we talk about a generalized anomalous society so much when we should so clearly focus ourselves on our own local communities where we can be effective, personally effective? I agree. It's a good point. And you know, this issue isn't going to be solved nationally. It won't be solved because some people at the national level start figuring things out. It will be a bottom-up effort, and it will start in local communities. And so I think it's, to me, at least as I try to think about it, you know, to me it's not how do we change everything at the broad level, but how do we change things here. There's a group in Omaha called Mad Dads. It's a group of African American men, and they say they're mad dads, and one of the things they do is they chase drug dealers out of the neighborhood. They wear these t-shirts called Mad Dads, and they just literally chase out drug dealers. And they chaperone the school events, and it's really a very strong male presence in the community of men as fathers. And I heard somebody ask Eddie Staten one time, and says, well, you know, the drug dealers will just go somewhere else. And he said, that's right. They'll just go somewhere else. You know, so in other words, they're just going to change it here, where they are. And I think that's a good approach. How can people of such diverse backgrounds effectively join in finding a single solution to solve this dilemma? There won't be a single solution. There'll have to be a number of different approaches working through churches, community groups. The thing that I am concerned about as I just kind of think about how this issue is developing is it seems like we are now beginning to realize that it's a problem. The real challenge now that we've kind of agreed that it's a problem, what are we going to do about it? And I don't think there's one single thing to do. And one of the challenges we have ahead of us is working out some strategies and some ideas of wherever you are in your community, whether it's the church, the community organization, the school, the hospital, what can you do there? And I tried to suggest the idea of a resolution or a sort of a community resolution that would be an umbrella under which a lot of different people working in different ways could try to address the issue. I'm trying to find, everybody's being very nice. I'm trying to find somebody, nobody's being not nice, but what advice would you give a young mother faced with choosing between raising her child fatherless or staying with an abusive, uninvolved father who was himself raised without a father? So, wouldn't it be better to have the guy out of there if he's abusive? That's the question. And probably yes, it would be better. But let's just think about it in kind of three groups. Maybe there's some, let's just talk about marriages. Let's leave aside for a moment the fact that 31% of all of our babies now are born to never married mothers. Let's just take the 70% who are born to married couples. On one extreme, you're going to have some couples who are wonderfully happy, there's never a problem, they hold hands every day, and you don't have to worry about them at all. And on the other extreme, you're going to have some couples where there's an abusive or terrible situation. The sort of perfectly happy couples, I think, are extremely rare. I hardly know any of those sort of perfect, never have a problem marriages. And then the other extreme, where there's a terribly abusive situation, okay, there are going to be some, but a minority. There's the middle 80%. That's where I am, that's where I'm sure all of you are. It's in that middle 80%. It's not a perfect marriage, and it's not a marriage where there's violence and extreme dysfunction. It's that middle 80%. Here, what I'm saying is we are a society where most of that middle 80% are going to get a divorce. Most of them. And I think we ought to be a society where most of them don't. And I think that as opposed to the 31% of all babies born to never married mothers, I just think that's a tragedy and a shame. And we ought to do a lot better than that. So, in other words, we can't stop this effort by pointing out to the fact that there are a few abusive guys who probably we're all better off if they're not there. Are you including in Fatherless America fathers who, though divorced, try their best to keep healthy relationships with their kids? In the figure I gave you of 40%, I'm saying that the 40% of the children don't live with their fathers. And the questioner is saying, well, you know, aren't there a lot of guys who don't live with their children? They're divorced and they don't have custody anymore, but they remain active and involved in their children's lives. And there are such fathers. Just as, on the other hand, there's some fathers who are married and who come home every night, but who aren't really very good fathers. So it gets a little complicated, but let me say this about this question. Most divorced fathers drift away from their children. I wish it weren't that way, and there are exceptions. But most fathers drift away from their children almost as surely as they drift away from the mothers of their children. Within a few years after a divorce, one or both of the ex-spouses is usually remarried. Often one of the spouses, very commonly the custodial mother, has moved to a new community or even a new part of the country. And what is required of the divorced couple in order for the father to remain involved is they have to be very cooperative. They have to remain close, kind of physically close enough so that the father can be there on a regular basis. And they have to have a cooperative relationship, the mother and the father. They have to kind of get along, make decisions together in the best interest of the children. What does this sound like? This sounds like a married couple. That's exactly what this couple decided they didn't want to do anymore. And when a couple breaks up, there's often great bitterness and unhappiness and pain and a sense of betrayal and a real, you know, the novelist Pat Conroy says, with every divorce, a small civilization dies. And it's a lot of tragedy, and it's very difficult for the man who leaves the home and doesn't have a key to the house anymore. It's very difficult for those guys to remain present, active fathers for their kids. Now, some guys do it, and I admire them. But as a solution to the problem of fatherlessness, I don't really think it works very well to just say, okay, well, we can still have a very high divorce rate, and we'll just get the divorce guys to, you know, kind of be involved. And I know that maybe the person who wrote this question is one of those exceptional fathers who's a divorced father who's very involved. But the best studies on this tell us that for every father who's like that, there are 8 to 9 fathers who are just gone. They're just gone. Maybe they send some support every once in a while, and maybe they visit sometimes, but effectively they're gone because they can't cooperate with the mother, or they're just physically too far apart, or they remarried and their new loyalty is to their new family. So will you speak about why it's misleading to talk about getting deadbeat dads, cracking down on deadbeat dads? Well, we've all heard this. Crack down on deadbeat dads. Make those guys pay. The reason I don't like that idea is not because I don't think it's important for men to support their children. I believe it's a moral responsibility for every man to support his child. But what bothers me is when we pretend that fatherhood can be shrunken down to the size of a check that gets mailed. And what really is at stake here is the relationship between a father and his child. That's what's precious here. That's what's important. That's what's really going on. And so I think we miss the boat a lot of times in public policy and in our discussions when we take a kind of this angry thing of let's just make those dads pay. Yes, they should pay, but what's really at stake here is fatherhood, not this kind of vague thing called child support. So I have some concerns, which I could go into more detail later with whoever wrote this question, about our public policy of child support enforcement that seems to often emphasize purely the financial aspect of it and not emphasize the importance of fatherhood. Because I'll tell you, when children wake up crying at night or have nightmares or they feel sad about things, it's not because they didn't get the child support check. It's because they don't have their father. And so that's what we have to focus on. Do we need a march of 1 million men? I'm not sure if the questioner meant the march that's going to happen on Monday or not. It'd be nice to have 1 million men march on this issue of fatherhood. And I do think the 1 million men on Monday, despite whatever we think about Louis Farrakhan, a lot of the guys are going because they do feel very concerned about this issue. I'm going to go quickly here because I'm feeling like I just want to talk to you more instead of just reading these questions. What can churches do to get this problem before its membership? Good question. To me, the issue that I'd like to talk with church leaders about more is in the issue of marital preparation and marital enrichment. Because, a lot of times the churches are just renting the halls and not taking seriously this notion of being the custodian of our moral traditions about what it means to be married. And I know that I'm probably literally speaking to the choir on this, but I feel like I wish we could have more leadership from the churches in this area of helping young people really know what it means to accept and understand marriage as a life project and creating a culture of marriage. And if we wait around for the divorce lawyers and the talk show people, it's just not going to happen. Either on this issue of marital preparation and marital enrichment, it either happens out of our churches or it doesn't happen. That's just, nobody else is going to, if you wait for, Oprah and Geraldo and the evening news people to get right on this, you just wait forever. So this is the church's domain, and this questioner says, I want someone to tell me what to do. So do I. Please comment on step parenting and how influential these roles are to our kids. And here I'm going to stop and just ask you to just talk with me, because I've tried to pick some representative questions of the different kinds of questions that were submitted. A guy at lunch today, downstairs where we just were, asked, he said, well, can't stepfathers step in and give that fatherhood that the children need? And it's an interesting question, because 1 of every 5 married couples today with children contains a stepfather. 1 of every 5. Stepfathering is probably one of the fastest, it's the second fastest growing family trend in the country. After non-marital childbearing is the stepfather family. Because we say step-parenting, but step-parenting really doesn't describe what's going on. In most cases after divorce, the custody remains with the mother. she remarries, and the new father, who's not the biological father, the stepfather, comes in. That's what's going on. Those type of families outnumber any other type of step family by a factor of 17 to 1. So what's really going on where the kids live is mom plus a stepdad. That's the phenomenon. And it's 1 of every 5 married couples. And the big research studies that have been done on this have come to a very bleak conclusion, and is this one. The outcomes for children in stepfather homes, according to most measurements, are no better than and often worse than outcomes for children in mother-only homes. So the stepfather homes are not working well for children. They're a very volatile and fragile family form. The divorce rate is much higher in those homes. And because most of the biological fathers are still alive and sort of somewhere on the scene, there's a terrible issue of divided loyalties. And it's really, I'll put it to you this way. Remarriage can often provide a second chance at happiness for the adults. It does not provide a second chance at fatherhood for the children. I think that is perhaps you think that's too harsh, and I know there's some exceptions to that, but in general, that seems to be what the evidence is telling us. I wish it were different. If it were different, we could, if we were different, our children would be much better off. I want to stop there and just ask you to talk for a minute. Let's just talk. Somebody's question I must have not read, so you can just say it back to me. Here's the best I can do on that. I think we all should start with our own lives. A lot of us are either fathers, or we're close to somebody who is, or we're a child of a father. We start with our own lives, and we look inward, and with a sense of looking for what we can do better, and where we have not done everything we could, we try to have a commitment within our own lives to the importance of fatherhood. And then outside of that, in our roles as neighbors and friends and members of churches and synagogues, I think there are things that can be done in communities that sort of on a child by child and block by block basis can raise the standards of male behavior in a community. And I could give you many examples of such programs. Let me just give you one. There was a guy in Cleveland who worked as an intake worker in a public hospital. And he was to he filled out the forms when the young mothers would come in to have their babies, and there was a place that said father's name, and it was left blank in most of the intake forms. And indeed, I've asked in hospitals around the country, this is commonly the case, that the name of the father is simply left blank. And he would ask these young mothers to be, well, who's the father? And they would say, well, either none of your business or I don't know, or, which wasn't true. And he would press them a little bit. And they would say, well, why are you, what are you trying to say? My mother raised me by herself, and I'm just fine, and she's a great mother, and what do you, leave me alone. And he would say, I can tell by talking to you that you have a great mother, and I can tell that you are a fine young lady. But I would like to ask you that, looking back on your life, if you had a choice of having your father in your life to raise you and love you, or not, what would be your choice? And he said that a lot of the young girls would just burst into tears, And he would go out into the community, and he would get these guys, and he would take them to the hospital and to watch their babies being born, and he would get them to hold their babies in the hospital. And he began a program that's now called the Institute for Responsible Fatherhood, and he is, the way he would put it, is he is awakening in these young men what it means to be a father. And he does it by getting the girls who come into the hospitals to say who the father is, and he goes out into the community and he gets them, sort of almost physically gets them, takes them to the hospital, and so, now that's not some one answer that's going to change America, but I'm saying he was an outreach worker at a hospital. That's what he did. And I could probably give you, maybe if pressed, and if we had 2 or 3 hours, I could probably reproduce that story 30 times on 30 different people doing 30 different things. And the Pastor Wilson earlier today was telling me, he said, the nice thing about Habitat for Humanity is the speaker comes in and he presents the challenge, and he says, or she says, here's the issue, and everybody goes, yes. And then he says, well, and here's the booklet that shows you how to, get the wood, hammer the nail. There's the whole program. And we don't have that with this effort right now. And I wish I had, the kind of, form a group, give it this name. I don't have that, and I don't know if maybe somebody else does, and maybe when we get it, we'll look back and say, should have been obvious. That's what we do. So I'm left with just having to talk to the folks that sponsored this meeting, the committee of people that put this together, and there's some really good people who did it, who convened the meetings today, and begin to think about where are the Charles Ballards in Waynesboro at the public hospital, and in the schools, and in the churches, and in the communities, and maybe there can be some public discussion and some coming together of people around a shared goal. Yes. The problem with this thing, yeah, and the problem we're dealing with here is that we're talking about a very deep kind of change. It's not something you can just set up a little program somewhere and then It's a very profound kind of change. And yes.
Sometimes fathers want to be involved, and if they're not in a married situation, maybe they've attended prenatal classes with the mother of the baby, then at birth. But if they don't have a good relationship with her family,
Yes.
oftentimes fatherhood is stifled. And it's almost like you need those components, all three.
Yes. Yes.
So that's, sometimes fathers want to be
Yes.
fathers, and they're stopped.
And they're stopped, and sometimes the mother doesn't want them around, and sometimes the mother's family doesn't want them around. And see, I keep coming back to the fact, I heard somebody once say that people got so frustrated about this because it seemed to be such a breakdown, and somebody said, we should just make people get licensed, They just ought not be able to have children unless they... how many times have you heard people say, we make people pass a driving test if they want to drive. Why don't we make them get a parenting test if they want to parent? And I thought for a moment, and then I thought, we used to have such licenses. They're called marriage licenses. That's what we should have thought of that. We had the whole thing. The families had to meet. They all had to come together. One sat on this side, the other sat on that side. They shook. There was a whole procedure for this. And what we've seen is just boom,
The man was asking the question to the girl who was getting ready to have the baby. Maybe the girl needs that question before she's pregnant.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
It would have been better.
It would have been much better. And I think, it's just been a shame and reflects badly on us, the grown-ups, that we are not being clear with younger people about the importance of marriage, because I'll just stop there. Let's continue this. Yes, sir.
Something you said suggested that you thought that a lot of marriages could get better pre-marital counseling.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas or any success stories?
Yes, sir, there are. I think we have some important things to learn here from our Catholic friends with their number of marital preparation and enrichment programs. They have a program called Engaged Encounters. They have a pre-Cana program that they have. There's a program called Marriage Savers that a number of churches have adopted that has actually lowered the divorce rate in that church. And they say that even troubled marriages can be saved and turned into good marriages. And it's a very strong commitment by the entire congregation to helping people take marriage very seriously and understand how important and rewarding and how much hard work it is. And the whole community really is coming to the support of good marriages in the church. It's called Marriage Savers, and a number of churches have adopted it, and they've had results. A lot of times, it's hard to talk about this, because if I'm standing up here and I'm sounding like preaching on this issue, why I'm thinking, well, now there's John in the third pew, and he's divorced, and maybe he thinks, so there's a kind of it's difficult, I think, in a church community to talk about this in a way that's not divisive, but I think it's a real challenge we have, and there are some programs that I've seen that have been very encouraging in this area.
Any church can start now.
Any church.
Making those who marriages fail.
That's right. You can start now, and I'd be glad to introduce to you, and I'm sure Pastor Wilson and the other guys, know more than I do about this, but I certainly would be glad to tell you what I know about some of the efforts in churches that have really, that 80% of all marriages occur in a religious setting. So that's where it's happening. in churches. And most people want to get married in a church. And they believe on some level that they're making a sacred promise. And I think it's a shame when the churches fall down on the job of helping people take that very seriously.
I was thinking about the question or statement that you made or asked about, and one thing is this idea of the best interest of the child. What's in the best interest of the child?
Right.
Certainly, divorce doesn't usually look like it's in the best interest of the child. But part of what I like about what you're doing in this statement is it's partly saying, well, it's in the best interest of the child to have a nurturing relationship with its father. So if the mom or the in-laws don't like him, that wouldn't be the reason to block him from the child.
That's
That
right.
might be a reason for them to go to complain to their friends.
Right.
You know, get a pillow and punch it out, whatever they need to do. But building bridges between children and dad seems like furthers their goals, and that's part of this work is to get that information out.
Good.
Because I think they really want to help the child.
Yeah. That's a very good point. It's a very good point. And it's you know, it's pretty hard in a lot of these cases where the parents are apart.
But if the mom doesn't like and trust the dad,
Right.
how are they going to turn that precious child over to them?
Right. That's right.
Supervision. So
That's right.
You look at that mother and child bond, and
I was just, my mouth fell open. I mentioned to the story of when you spoke, this guy, Charles Ballard. I heard him, a guy one time said to him, the mother won't let me near the child. What am I supposed to do? And the first thing Ballard said was, the main thing you can do as a father is love and respect the mother of your child, even if you don't get along with her. And even if she didn't want you around. Pretty big, pretty tough thing to do. And then the second thing you can do is pursue a relationship with your child as best you can and let your child know that you are his or her father and you want to be the father as best you can be. Pursue a relationship, even if what's coming back to you is negative. This calls upon people to act heroically, however. That's the problem with it. It calls upon heroism that most of us, that I don't have, and I think most people don't have. So I keep coming back to the fact that if we really want to fix what's broken at a deep sense, we have to not say, how can we, after this level of estrangement, try to make something happen? How can we find ways to have that mother-father couple together? That's really, I think, the heart of it. And so if I had to pick one, somebody said, well, what can we specifically do? And I maybe gave an answer that sounded a little vague. I'll tell you, I'm not vague on how you know if you're getting results. You look and see how many kids in this town don't have their father in their lives. And you can start with the issue of how many aren't living with their father. And then you see if you can make that number go down. It's a measurable thing. And it might take a while to do it, but that's really what you want to do.
And I keep thinking we have to look at teen pregnancy because we know that's going to set up an
Yes.
fatherless.
We know that in most of those instances, those kids will never be with their father.
Most of those that I'm aware of are already second generation. They are children who have been raised without their parents who are now becoming parents without the vision of what it is to be a father because they did not get any father in themselves. They are irresponsible. They're gone. They're just not.
And most of,
They did not have a whole lot of interest in fathering, the ones that I know of.
yes, and it's a kind of a snowball because if for most men, if you tend to kind of reproduce what you had from your father, even if it was absence, even if it was abuse, you tend to reproduce, you tend to follow in that pattern. Although there is something that I see sometimes that I find very moving. I've had a lot of guys say to me, my father was not there for me, and I tell myself every day that I will not let happen to my child what happened to me. You know? So why is it that what's the trick that some people are able to find in themselves the capacity or the strength to kind of break that cycle and say, I am going to make the special effort to not have happen to my child what happened to me. And I've heard men say that, and I believe them, that they do think about it every day. And that's a powerful thing. And this guy Ballard that I mentioned, he's very good at kind of turning that key in young men. But how you do it, how you could do it in this community with the people you're working, I'm not. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that whether we're speaking of this church or this congregation or whatever community we are each a member of, that those of us who are here because we either believe or want to be convinced that fatherhood is of significant value. And if that's so, it seems to me that we should take it individually, personally, to our hearts when we see a marriage breaking up, when we see a father being expelled from his own family. I mean, and we have a tendency in America, because this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, to turn our backs on people who are in the desperate straits of going through the divorce that produces childless homes. And I don't think we can, as human beings, continue to turn our backs on those in our own communities who are in need of help. And I should just stop there. I mean, it seems to me if improving fatherhood and the lot of fatherhood is an answer to making this a better world and a better society and a better community where I live, then I have the obligation, when I know of a couple who is having a problem, to say, gee, I'm sorry you're having a problem. Is there anything I can do? Instead of pretending like they're not having a problem, turning them back.
Or that you're indifferent to the outcome there. Yes.
Then they can
Yes.
go ahead and their incompatibility.
Right. I'm told by
I'm going to let you have the last word in response to that.
last word is that I'm really grateful to you all for inviting me into your community. It's been a great day for me, and I hope that out of these discussions, you know, I'm on a plane out of here in the morning, and but what I would hope that you know, the people that organized this event today and invited all of you here, it seems to me that there's an opportunity here for some good work to take place, and I would just urge you to with the kind of passion about it that you just said, to do your best to grapple with this issue and work as a group of leaders in the community. Whether you start an organization or a committee, or I mean, you can work out the strategies and you can work out the structure for it and where the next meeting is and so on. But you have a group of very good leaders that have organized these sessions today. And I just would urge you to consider taking action, because the big problem on this for the last several decades is that we have been, it's like you said, you know, we've just been passive here. we've been, all of us, we've been passive, and we've told ourselves some happy talk about how it's going to be okay if so many fathers, we're going to find a substitute solution somehow, and it's not working. And so I think we kind of shift the focus, and we try to focus on something that really could make a difference. I believe this really can, and I just would urge you, as my last word, to work together as a community. And if there's any way that those of us at the Fatherhood Initiative, Alan and Pastor Wilson, the others, they have our numbers, and I'd love to keep in touch with you and be a way to help any way I can from a distance. But the burden's on you, and I urge you to take it seriously and to try to do something here in this good community of yours. Thank you.
Blankenhorn's presentation. At lunch today, 40 community leaders from this valley heard his presentation, and 975 additional persons present. So over 150 people today have heard this message, and I am quite convinced Christopher County will have this in the paper over the weekend, and another several thousand will hear about it through that media, and we want to thank them for the articles and exposure that they gave us already this week. So Waynesboro and Stanton will have known about this after this week. And this 8 months of work that we've done to bring David here and to organize our community will continue. What I'd like you to do is to help us do that tonight in one particular way with that little green sheet that you have. I know you're tired and want to go home. You'll take one